Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yongki, and I'm a senior associate at Scar Legal PC. Today, we are going to talk about E2 visa options for low investment amounts and high risk E2 visa cases. Uh, and we are very lucky to have our firm's another senior associate, Jie Huang, who has a very high reputation in the E2 visa world, as the speaker for this webinar. I will be covering the first half of our presentation and she will take over the rest. Before we dive in, let me briefly introduce our firm and go over a few housekeeping items. We are a full service immigration law firm and we offer services in a wide range of areas including E2, O1, TN, L1, H1B, and any types of employment or family-based green card cases. That said, we are especially well known for our work with the E2 visas. We have built a strong reputation in this area and we have processed many E2 visa cases including high risk related cases and have worked with the US consular offices all over the world. One particular reason for our focus on E2 visa is that our firm was established on E2 visa by our firm's founder Ian Scott himself. And that's why we know a lot about E2 visa world. At the end of this webinar, we'll send you several useful tools. A copy of the PowerPoint presentation we'll go through today, a link where you could download the guides with more details on visa options, a link to sign up for additional webinars, a link to webinar recording on YouTube. We encourage you to subscribe and hit the notification button as we regularly post immigration related videos. And finally, a link where you can sign up a private consultation with our team. For any questions during this webinar, please type them into chat box or Q&A box. We'll address all the questions at the end of presentation. And with that, let's get started. So what are the E2 visa requirements? Now, E2 visa is basically based on treaty agreement between the United States and foreign country. And currently, USA has signed the agreement with more than 80 countries. The list of E2 countries occasionally change. Well, not that often. Every few years, a few countries would be added, a few countries would fall out from the list. So you should check the official E2 country list before you actually submit your E2 visa application. Please keep in mind that though you do not need to be born from the treaty country. You just need to hold a passport. So for example, let's say you're born in India, which is not a treaty country with the United States yet, but later you immigrant to Canada. And if you have a Canadian passport right now, then you are eligible for the E2 visa. And you must have at least 50%, half of the E2 company's ownership. The corporation type does not matter. We usually recommend LLC or C Corps because these are the types giving you very simple and clear supporting document, but it doesn't really matter. You could have a business partner as well. For example, if you are Canadian and your business partner who owns the other half, 50% of a company's ownership has an Italian passport, then your business partner can also apply for the E2 visa. But you have to make sure that you are able to maintain at least 50% ownership all the time. This requirement continues when you renew your E2 visa later. So you should consult with an immigration attorney whenever there is any change of ownership structure in your E2 business. The next requirement is that you must make a substantial investment. Then what is the substantial investment? What is the definition of it? We'll talk about it in more detail later, but generally speaking, it means that the sufficient amount to make the E2 business fully operational. For example, if your business is a consulting company, then obviously the required funds to establish and start the business are less than a manufacturing facilities. However, can you claim that your consulting company only need $5,000 to make it fully operational? Not likely. In order to meet the standard of consular officers, satisfy their review standard, we generally recommend to invest at least minimum $50,000 regardless of your business type. Okay. So I'm sure that Gia will address this issue more in detail later on. For now, let's go with each bullet point here. So funds must be at risk. It means the wire transferred investment funds must be used and spent. For example, you transferred $100,000 to the E2 business corporate account. Then you need to spend money to obtain all kind of necessary stuff, including office lease, office equipment, other professional like accounting or marketing services. You will need to show that you have spent sufficient amount out of this transferred $100,000 in your E2 visa application. Next one is source of funds should be satisfied. Any legit source could be used, but please keep in mind that the government wants to see very clear fund flows from the documentation. So you should try to keep it simple and easy for the government officers to understand how funds were initially originated and came to the E2 business account. How much is enough? Again, we'll talk about it more detail in next slide, but generally speaking, we recommend you to invest and spend at least $50,000. Typical E2 expenditures. So this bullet point is to show you that how you should spend your investment fund for the E2 visa application. You do not want to spend several $100s for a beautiful dinner with your potential business partner and claim it as a business expense. In real life, yes, you could claim it for your company's tax deduction purpose, but such is not highly recommended for your E2 visa application. So keep in mind that inventory, equipment, website, office supplies, office and warehouse rent, marketing, business entity setup, these are the most preferred expenses for your E2 visa application. Next slide. The next requirement, business cannot be marginal. This is the whole point. That why U.S. government is giving out the E2 visa to the foreign nationals. E2 business is supposed to create jobs and contribute to the local economy in the United States. So if your E2 business is barely making incomes just to cover the E2 investors and family members' living costs, then government would not like it because it wouldn't create any jobs in the United States. Therefore, you should keep in mind that your E2 business should create enough incomes to hire US employees. You could even hire an employee before you apply for the E2 visa application, before you submit the E2 visa application. Such would actually strengthen your E2 visa application. So if you think your investment is kind of low, and it may be a good strategy to hire a US employee before the visa application. Business must be real and operating. What it means is that when you submit your E2 visa application, your business must be already fully ready to operate or already up and running by hired US workers. To prove this element is satisfied, you will usually need to submit a signed commercial lease agreement, business entity registration document, company website showing that it's already running, maybe contracts with the customers and licenses if it is applicable. Next, you will also solely develop and direct the E2 enterprise. It simply means that you are coming to United States only for your E2 business. So your E2 business is basically your full-time job. That's what it means. You should not driving an Uber as a side hustle or just become a passive shareholder of your E2 business. You should be actively participating in the B2 business's daily operations. Okay. Next, you should maintain an intention to return to home country upon expiration of your E2 visa. Please note that E2 visa is not a green card. It does not automatically lead to green card either. Okay, U.S. immigration system is a little different from other countries. It only allows you to enter the United States for temporary period to develop and run your E2 business. But it does not mean that you cannot renew your E2 visa or obtain U.S. permanent residency later. You will be able to renew it and eventually you may go after U.S. green card. But you should carefully develop your green card case direction with an immigration attorney. Okay. The next one is the options for the E2 business starting point. You may start a brand new business or buy an existing business. If you are considering to buy an existing business, you should consider a business that already has a good number of employees. Because again, having existing employees before the visa application submission is really good plus point. Okay. Also, you could arrange escrow consideration in this transaction. But this is one exception that to the requirement where I said you should have spent enough money before applying E2 visa. In this type of business transaction settings, the contract language will say that the transaction money, the purchase price, will be held in the escrow account and will be released to the seller upon the approval of your E2 visa application. And then it will also say that if the buyer's E2 visa application is denied, then the full the purchase price will be returned to the buyer. So that's why you should keep in mind about these additional settings of business transactions. Because the business has already everything set up, you do not really need to spend the money to buy many stuff. Next. How long is E2 visa valid? It depends on the treaty agreement between the United States and foreign country. It could be very short, like 3 months, or maximum 5 years. But even if you get the 3 months of E2 visa, it does not mean that you will be only allowed to run your E2 business for the 3 months. Regardless of visa validity duration on your passport, you will typically get 2 years of E2 status when you come to the United States. The CBP at the airport will issue something called I-94, which will decide how long you could stay in the United States, and it will state that you are authorized to stay as an E2 status inside the United States for the next 2 years. Okay. When your E2 visa is already expired, because you have issued the E2 validity duration is very short, you can stay in the United States for 2 years, but once you go out from the United States, then it means that you will need to reapply your E2 visa again. Okay. Next slide. How much investment is enough? Okay, so regulations do not specifically state a minimum investment amount for the E2 visa category. As you know, some of you know, the EB5 requires a minimum investment amount like $800,000, but E2 does not have such a requirement. This means you could get the approval even with the $50,000, depending on the type of business. And more importantly, you need to show the amount is enough to make the business fully operational, and that it should be looking reasonable to the government officer. That's why we usually recommend investing at least $50,000 to meet the government officer's review standards. Sometimes government applies what is called proportionality test. This usually comes up in very large investment settings, like $1 million, like pharmaceutical factories. In the case, you do not need to spend 100% before you apply. But since we are talking about today smaller and riskier investment cases, I would generally say the proportional test does not really apply. For the small businesses, it is usually better if you spend 100% or close to 100% of the investment fund before you submit the application. If you are buying a business, you may wonder what counts as a substantial amount. Usually it means a fair market value. To find out whether you are paying the fair market value, you may hire a business appraiser or get an evaluation report, but it's usually not required. Okay. Next slide. If your E2 case is weak because you have a low investment amount, then you may want to strengthen other aspects of your case. Now, hiring a US worker before you submit the application is probably one of the best steps you can take. Another thing you can do is to show that your E2 business already has demand from the potential client or business partners in the United States. Like, for example, already signed the contract with the potential client, MOU, a letter of intent from the potential client could be very useful. Okay. You could also get a letter from a local chamber of commerce where your E2 business is located. Such letter would help to show that your E2 business will create jobs and provide value to the community. This kind of support could make a difference in a low investment case. As you may know, a business plan is one of the required documents in E2 visa applications. A strong plan shows your marketing, your competitive strategy, and projected revenues, financial projections, and how many employees you are planning to hire over the next 5 years. These type of strong projections will improve your strength, your E2 visa case as well. That's why when our firm prepares one for you, it is usually more than 30 pages and it is designed to strengthen the case and meet the officer's standard. A CPA's letter could be also used. This type of letter basically will say that the accountant has reviewed the financials of your E2 business and based on their experience, the invested amount is sufficient to operate the business. You could be more creative to strengthen a low investment case, but these are the typical ways we recommend. Okay. Next. What are some common E2 visa expenditures? Okay. This slide is about it will show that the list of the E2 expenditures we usually recommend to spend. Okay. Basically, you need to spend many types of categories, not only focusing on one particular point. Let's say, for example, you have $50,000, but you spend $50,000 only business premise. You pay the rent for the next 3 years and done. And you are trying to get submitting application only based on that. It will not working that way. Point is, you should spend reasonable amount for the covering whatever necessary categories of this list. Okay. Of course, the exact expenses could vary depending on type of business you are operating, but this list should give you a general idea of where your investment funds are usually spent. One important point is that these are considered as good expenditures. Okay, we do not recommend concentrating all of your spending on just one, two categories. That's the key point that you should remember from this slide. Instead, it is usually better to distribute your E2 investment fund across different categories that are relevant to your business. Okay. Okay, with that in mind, let me turn it over to Jie, who will guide you through the next part of our presentation. She will cover how to wisely spend the money to improve your E2 case and how to overcome some common challenges. So please stay tuned.
Thank you, Yonggi. All right. So let's go on to the next slide and let's talk a little bit about some of the weaker types of expenditures that we actually wouldn't recommend including in your investment schedule. Now, Yonggi went through some of the more classic, stronger types of expenditures that really deal with what you would typically need to get a business up and running, such as, commercial lease, equipment, employee payments, professional fees, marketing, and things like that. Now, however, for some types of expenditures, you don't want to include them in your investment as part of your E2 investment, and those are related to things like traveling costs, flights, for example, even if you are flying into the US to, explore business opportunities or meet with potential business partners, you typically wouldn't include those types of traveling expenditures as part of your investment. Similarly, purchasing a car or vehicle, it can work in particular types of cases, but if you're only purchasing the car to, just help you move to and from your house to your office, that kind of expenditure wouldn't really qualify as a veritable E2 expense. For some types of businesses, such as perhaps a construction business or a landscaping business where you actually do need a company car to transport heavy equipment or things like that, uh, um, that may work as part of your E2 expense, but you want to tread very carefully if you're trying to include a car, because for many other cases it won't simply work. So you want to be careful to clarify the business necessity for that, and also the typical business practice around that. Travel accommodations, for similar reasons, we don't recommend including those types of expenses. Meals, we would also not include, and things like entertainment. Those are not usually seen as a veritable E2 investment. So we would recommend not including those types of expenditures to your investment amount. Similarly, the other type of expense we want to avoid are and want to be very careful of are expenses paid to any parties that are related to you. So, for example, if you're setting up a business and let's say your brother is a web designer and you hire your brother to design your business website for you, and you're paying your brother $20,000 to design the website, for obvious reasons, we would not recommend doing that, just because that kind of related party transaction raises risks to the consular officer who's reviewing your case that this was actually not a bona fide business transaction, not a legitimate expense. So expenses paid to related parties definitely is something that we want to be careful about when we're building the investment schedule and the investment amount. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide. And now let's go over some challenges and tips that relate to certain types of businesses that clients use to apply for an E2 visa for. So let's talk a little bit about consulting businesses. Now, what are some common challenges and tips regarding applying for an E2 visa with a consulting business? So theoretically, in terms of the practical business necessities, you may need a very low investment to start a consulting type business. For many practitioners, you may just need, a laptop with which to, provide services to clients. Maybe you need a little office, but you may or may not even need an office. And for employees, maybe you need a very low number of employees when you're starting out. There's typically no need for very expensive equipment like you would expect for a manufacturing business, for example, or there is less need of inventory because it's not a material-based business. So you may argue that, oh, I only need to spend $2,000, $3,000 on everything to set up a consulting business. However, and Yonggi did go over this in the previous slide, unfortunately, such a very low amount of spending doesn't suffice to uh, convince the government that you're committed to running the business for an E-2 visa perspective. Practically, you do need to spend a lot more than that to demonstrate to the government that you are, in fact, committed to the operation and that everything related to, getting the business up and running has been secured. Um, so what are some strategies if, your investment amount is perhaps not, on the lower side? You may consider obtaining copies of articles from industry research organizations that shows exactly how much it costs to get the business up and running. And you can point out to the government that you have spent actually more than that. So it is actually sufficient to get that particular type of business up and running. And another strategy that we recommend considering is, yeah, actually do consider spending more money than what is actually needed as a minimum to get the business up and running. So even if you don't need a bigger office, maybe you may consider getting a larger office to show that, you're perhaps looking to the future. And if you're looking to hire, two more employees in the next 2 years, you may, get the office, a bigger office in advance to, make room for that future growth. Similarly, if you are, buying a business laptop for yourself, but also maybe you're thinking of hiring two employees in the next 2 years, and maybe you want to front those costs and purchase those additional laptops for your employees in advance. So, and those kinds of, business expenses, you would be fronting them and maybe buying them earlier than you may have wanted to, but these would still be useful to your business as it grows, and it would be relevant expenses for the business, and that would help increase the investment amount towards, meeting the requirement um, better. Um, the other the other strategy you can consider um, is to spend money on a wider range of items that demonstrate that you are, in fact, committed to successfully operate the business. With regards to office space, and I did mention this a little bit, you can choose to prepay the rent for 6 months, 12 months, and in that way, you can increase the amount that you're paying upfront. So that's one strategy that a lot of our clients have used. And I also mentioned equipment. If you foresee that you will be needing more equipment in the future, you can go ahead and buy them in advance. And in that way, you would be increasing the amount of investment you are doing upfront. Investing in marketing is a great way to increase the investment amount. It will also be relevant in showing the government that there will be pipeline channels built up where you would be attracting clients to your firm. So that would be a good way to increase your spending as well. Now, another very useful strategy is to simply hire an employee or employees even before you apply for the E-2 visa. And hiring an employee helps with many different aspects of an E-2 application. It also helps with, meeting the marginality requirement, where the government wants to see that the consulting firm won't really be sort of a one-person shop kind of deal, but more a active business that hires U.S. employees to meet the marginality requirement. And if you go ahead and hire an employee even before you apply for the E-2 visa, that's almost preempting a challenge to that aspect. So It would be good in that way, and also be helpful for meeting the real and operating prong of showing that a business is real and active because it actually already has a U.S. employee who's ready to work. So that can also be helpful. And finally, if you hire an employee, even if it's a part-time employee, even if it's, just one employee, that could help with meeting the investment amount requirement because any expense that you spend related to hiring that employee, such as setting up the payroll, any, costs that you pay for an accounting firm to, do that infrastructure, and also any payments that you actually pay to the employee's payroll, any of the initial, salaries that you pay to the employee, all of those amounts can also be added to the investment amount. So that can be a very good way to increase the investment amount as well, especially if you're having trouble thinking of categories to spend on for a consulting business. So overall, there are a variety of strategies you can use to build a persuasive E2 investment uh, that will, position you well for increasing your chances at approval, even if, it's a small consulting firm and initially you may not, need the minimum investment that you may need for practical business purposes may be low, but there are definitely other categories where you could boost the investment amount to position your case better for the E2 approval. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide. And let's talk a little bit about real estate investments as a strategy for getting an E2 visa. Now, the thing to note here is real estate investment based E2 visa application can be very challenging and it can be a risky category of business with which to apply for an E2 visa. And there are several reasons for that. The first reason is that real estate investing is often considered a passive activity. And one of the requirements to get an E2 visa is that it must be a real and active business that provides goods or services to the US society. But in the case where, for example, if you buy a house in the hopes that it'll appreciate, for example. And even if you do things like house flipping, where you're improving certain types of certain, aspects of the house in the hopes that it will appreciate later, that kind of investment activity, unfortunately, is not the type of active business running activity that the E2 visa program was designed for. So and we've also heard of cases where someone would go on to the E2 visa interview and the officer would just ask, "Well, is this a house flipping business?" And the person said no, and the officer said, "Good," because house flipping for um, personal reasons that would not, be an activity that will qualify you for the E2 visa. So that's an anecdote that you can think about when we think about real estate investment types of businesses and how risky that they could be. Now, some ways where you can qualify for an E2 visa with a real estate uh, industry business, we've definitely worked with many clients who've successfully earned an approval for that. In cases where the activity was fully commercial, so we've gotten approvals where the business was a construction business, for example, on a commercial scale, um, developing new, real estate development projects on a large scale. We were able to get approvals for that. Renovation businesses can also work. And if you are going to set up a real estate company that does house flipping, if you're doing it on a very large commercial scale, so let's say you're going to be managing 50 different properties and doing construction work to improve the value of those properties, and you're going to be selling them on such a commercial scale and be hiring employees in the process, that may also work. But yeah, definitely you would need to do more work to convince the government why it's different from this, this typical profile of someone buying a house and then, doing improvements on it and trying to sell it later and in the hopes that it'll appreciate, which is more like a personal investment, passive investment activity rather than a really an active business that the E2 visa program is designed for. Real estate management companies can also work if you are going to be building a real estate management or brokerage firm where you will be managing properties of others. And that you will, be doing this similarly on a commercial scale, which would match up more with the model of a business that provides goods or services rather than, just putting a house on the name of an LLC and then, hoping that it'll appreciate. So definitely nuance is very, very important when you're working with, you know, a real estate industry business and trying to apply for an E2 visa based on that, get in touch with us so that we can help you frame the visa application in the right way to increase your chances of success. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide. Yeah, so another type of business that can be a bit risky or challenging for an E2 visa case are equity trading companies. And why is it challenging? Really, for the similar reason that I just mentioned in the previous slide with regards to real estate investment type businesses. If the government thinks that you are simply, purchasing stock and maybe trading stock for that you own for the purposes of, creating profit for you and your family on such a small scale, that would match up more with the image of a passive activity, passive, asset appreciation type of activity rather than a real and active business that provides goods and services to society. So day trading, personal investing, aiming to, you know, aiming for that kind of profit on the stocks that you own or that an LLC that you establish owns that would not match up with the type of real and operating business that the E2 visa program is looking for. If you are doing this equity trading business as on a commercial scale, let's say, if that is actually the business that you're building, and if you will be doing so not just to generate profit for yourself and your family, but you'll be doing this for many different clients, institutional clients, third-party clients. And if that firm would be doing that as the service that it would be offering, then it could be possible to apply for an E2 visa through that kind of business, but again, it should be on a commercial scale. Really, the government should be convinced that this is an real and active business that provides goods or services to society. So it must definitely go beyond, this personal scale to do that. The other challenge is also that the business must support U.S. workers. And we've been talking about the marginality requirement in previous slides. The government wants to see that this is not just a solo one-person activity, but this business will end up hiring U.S. workers. So that can also be a challenge if it is a very small scale trading firm where you're not hiring, a number of employees to support that activity. So that can and also be another risk factor. The other risk factor is that equity trading is a highly regulated industry. So there may be specific licensing requirements that you need to meet in order to legally operate in the equity trading space. So you need to do your research and make sure that all of the required licenses you have properly acquired them before applying for the E2 visa, because that may become an issue when the consular officer is looking at your case. The important thing, yes, is that, and the final bullet point is that you will have to convince an officer that the business is more than just a passive, asset appreciation activity that you do for your own or for your family's, personal uses, right? You need to show that what you're doing is not merely, passive asset growth activity, but is more like an active business providing services for third party clients. So that could be a higher hurdle to meet. So definitely reach out to us if you're considering building an E2 visa case in this particular industry. All right, so now going on to the next slide, what are some reasons for E2 visa denials? So the first and common reason for E2 visa denials is certainly a low investment amount. Let's say if you say that if you tell the government that you're setting up a consulting firm, but you only spent $5,000 on buying a laptop and securing a lease, and then say, okay, now this business is ready for an E2 visa. Unfortunately, even if it is practically ready in terms of business sense, for the purposes of the E2 visa program, the government will simply not be convinced that you are committed to running the business with that of a low investment amount. There are a couple of solutions that you can use when that is the reason for the denial. You can simply spend more money on different things, different categories of expenses that we've looked at in the previous slides, such as, maybe you can go ahead and hire an employee. Maybe you can, invest more in equipment. Maybe you can invest more in marketing. So you can definitely strengthen your investment schedule and then apply again. So that can be a solution to that type of denial. Uh, the nature of the business can also be a factor for an E2 visa denial. And we've looked at, certain house flipping types of business activity, certain equity trading type of, business proposals. The government may simply not be convinced that this is an active business. They can think that this is more like a passive asset appreciation kind of activity and then, deny the visa on that regard. So that can also be an issue there. Filing location and venue is also a very important factor that you should consider when you're building your E2 visa case. Certain consulates around the world are used to seeing very large companies applying for E2 visas for their employees. So for that, if you're applying for those types of consulates, maybe you want to spend a little more than usual and adjust your investment amount to meet those different expectations. Um, Another issue is that, let's say you are already in the United States and you want to change your status to an E2 status from a different status. If you're applying with USCIS, the USCIS has kind of a lenient standard on the investment amount, so you could likely get approved with a lower investment amount. But what USCIS is really strict about is the full clarification of the source, accumulation of the source of funds, and transfer of the source of funds. All of the trail must be fully visible, and you must also show them a dollar for dollar accounting on where that money came from. And perhaps because of those different focuses, your packet may not have met the requirements, documentation requirements that the particular venue requires. So that can be another reason for that. You definitely want to work with a lawyer who knows the nuances of what types of evidences are emphasized in different venues and different filing locations. So definitely reach out to us for that. If you have a similar business that you have been running for a long time in your home country, but you have not hired any employees. So if you were, working as a solo consultant for, 10 years, but you never hired anyone, well, that can be a pretty difficult challenge if, that comes up in the interview because the government will ask you, well, you haven't hired anyone for the past 10 years and you've been operating as a solo consultant. How can I believe that you are actually going to hire employees when you run that similar type of business in the United States? And one solution to that is to actually go ahead and hire someone even before you apply for the E2 visa. And then you can bring the payroll to the visa interview and you can explain to the officer, well, in the United States, I'm going to do this on a larger scale. So in order to support that, I actually went ahead and hired a junior consultant. Something like that. That could really help on preemptively responding to such a challenge if there is a risk factor like that. So definitely that reason can be addressed. Um, yeah, so similarly, if the government has a concern for some reason that the business will not create jobs for US workers and it will be more like, a personal one person type of very small non-marginal marginal type of business, then that can, yes, be a reason for denial of the E-2 visa because as we have mentioned before in previous slides, one of the main points of the E-2 visa is that the government wants to see an active and real business that will create jobs for US workers. Issues with adjudicating officer. Sometimes, adjudicating officers are human. Sometimes they have a particular impression of your case, and maybe it's difficult to change that particular impression. Things happen, sometimes you're unlucky and get, a particular officer who is biased against your case for whatever reason. Um, you can definitely try to apply again. Definitely talk to your lawyers, see if there are any concern areas that can be addressed before applying again. But it is possible to apply again in many cases if it is, denial based on 214B. Uh, um, and when you apply again, the consulate would likely assign you to a different officer to look at your case. So usually you don't get the same person looking at the case. So that can be one strategy. Finally, if you simply did not meet the requirements at the time of filing, and there are many examples of that. If, for example, if you didn't meet the ownership requirement, or if the nationality of the business was actually not the same as your nationality, like those types of eligibility problems with eligibility can impact the decision. So definitely reach out to us if you'd like us to handle your case to prevent those kinds of mistakes with eligibility, meeting the eligibility at the time of filing. All right. A little bit on adjudication trends. So, what are the approval rates for E-2 visas? Uh, E-2 visa approval rates are still very high. So if you look at government posted approval rates, which would include actually self-filed E-2 visa petitions, still between 80% and 90%. And this has not gone down with the new administration. Um, Usually, petitions prepared by lawyers have a higher approval rate for obvious reasons. We do a comprehensive screening for any issues and help the client, strengthen weak points to increase the approval chances. So our approval rate is yeah, very high, 98% or higher. And we've done thousands of cases. Although past results do not predict future outcome, definitely it'll help you to retain counsel who can advise on the strategy for your case. Timelines, let's go quickly through that. London tends to be quite slow. I would say we're seeing at least 6 months between filing and, being invited for an interview. So pretty slow there. Toronto, it's pretty good. Any delays related to COVID-related slowdowns have been fully recovered. So now we're seeing from filing to interview around 2 months. That's the timeline that we're seeing. So Toronto is quite quick on that. Generally, I would say expect anywhere around, 4 months, 6 months for, generally in the global consulates. If you're applying for an E-2 visa, you would typically provide the E-2 application package, and the consulate would take some time to review your file, and then they will reach out to you to schedule the interview. So it can be quite a lengthy process if you're applying for an E-2 visa at a consulate. Now, if you're in the United States on a different visa, let's say a F1 visa or, yeah, any different type of visa. And if you want to change your status to E-2, then you can file directly to USCIS for E-2 classification for, to change your status like that. If you do that, you can use premium processing, which is a very huge benefit. If you use premium processing, you could get an answer within 15 business days, which is very fast. The government could also request more evidence, issue an RFE, and if you get that, then you will get a couple more months to prepare the evidence to respond to the RFE. And once you do that, the government will take another 15 business days to respond to your response to the RFE. And that's when you use premium processing. If you use regular processing, then the processing times will lengthen further. But having the premium processing option can be useful for certain people who are already in the United States on a different status. One thing to note, though, is if you change status into E2 while you're in the United States, the change of status is only valid for that particular stay. And when you have to leave the United States for some reason, in order to get back, you actually need a new E2 visa. And the fact that you have had USCIS approval doesn't guarantee that you will get an E2 visa at your home country consulate. So at that point, you will pretty much need to submit a fresh new application for an E2 visa at your home country consulate. So that's definitely something to consider if you have travel needs. And I already went over a little bit about USCIS versus consulate. One thing to note, though, that is USCIS is lenient with the investment amount requirement. So we've seen approvals with much lower total investment amounts than we typically see at a consulate. If you only need like $40,000, $30,000 of spending to set up a consulting firm, it is possible that USCIS will be more lenient to those sorts of lower amounts. However, they do look very carefully at the source and trail of funds. You do need to provide a dollar-to-dollar accounting on where all of that money came from. So that is kind of the countervailing, difficulty of USCIS petitions, and also USCIS petitions. If you get a USCIS change of status to E2, unfortunately, it does not give you the ability to travel in and out of the United States. It's only valid for your particular stay where you were granted the status. So that's another disadvantage of going for a USCIS filing. Um, Post-specific considerations. So each post in different countries have specific instructions. They have different preferences on what kind of evidence they want you to submit. Certain consulates even want you to certify your business plans with a CPA, a certified public accountant. So there needs to be this extra step when you're submitting a business plan as part of your E2 application. So definitely work with us because we are aware of those nuance differences per each post. If you don't follow the instructions correctly, that can significantly delay your ability or even, result in rejection of your application. So definitely you want to avoid, wasting your time and effort because of those technicalities. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide. What are some issues in complex areas to keep in mind? So the first question to clarify, do I have to hire employees before I apply for an E2 visa? Now, the answer to that question is no. There is no legal requirement that your business already has employees by the time you apply for the E2 visa, especially if you're applying with a startup, as long as you can convince the government that you will be hiring employees. In the next several years once you are in the United States on the E2 visa. However, it can be very helpful if you hire an employee before you apply, if otherwise your business is a higher risk type of business, such as if it's a consulting firm and if your investment amount is very low or on the low side. If you go ahead and hire an employee, that can be helpful towards meeting, the marginality requirement, and also can boost the investment amount and have a lot of benefits on strengthening your file. So it can be a good strategy to use if otherwise you have weaknesses in your petition. If you have complicated sources and trail of funds, you may have a little bit more challenge submitting a USCIS filing. Loans and gifts can be used as a source of funds, but it is very important to note that if you're using a personal loan, so let's say your brother gave you a loan and you're going to use that as your source of funds, you still need to go one step further and tell the government where your brother earned the money that he loaned you. So you can't just stop there. You can't just stop at the loan. You still need to go one step further and clarify where the loaner loaned you the money. And in cases of a personal loan, if it's a commercial loan where, let's say, a line of credit, for example, you may not need to do that. But for personal loans, you do need to go one step further. And same issue with gifts. Even if your mother gifted you the money, you can't just stop at the fact that your mother gifted you the money. You need to show where your mother earned the money that she gifted you. So there needs to be these two steps of analysis if you're, trying to clarify the source and trail of funds. One thing to note about loans is that any loan that you use cannot be secured by the E2 business's assets or the E2 business itself. So you can use an unsecured loan, or you can use a loan secured by an unrelated property, such as your house, but it should not, it should be separate from the E2 business assets. E2 visas for two investors, it is possible if each investor owns 50-50. That is certainly a possibility. You need to be careful of substantive changes to the E2 business after filing. So dramatic changes in ownership, dramatic changes in types of business, those things can pose risks for the renewal state and for renewal stage and for maintenance of status. You must stay true to the original E2 business plan, and you should not dissolve the E2 entity. It's important to remember that once you get approved for the E2 visa, your work authorization is only tied to that E2 entity that you applied for the E2 visa for. So you can't just come into the US and set up, 100 different entities and work for all of these entities. That it would be a violation. So you want to be careful about that as well. Family business purchases is risky because the government may think that it was not a bona fide business transaction. So if you're purchasing a business from not the open market, so let's say you know someone who's selling a business, and so it was not through, the open market transaction, then you need to be very careful on proving to the business, proving to the government that it was actually a bona fide business transaction in the fair market price. You may want to get, a letter from an independent CPA with that will support the valuation of the business. Really, yeah, it is quite risky to, try to qualify for the E2 with a family purchase. Definitely reach out to us and we'll, help you understand the risks and plan the way forward. Now, quickly on the impact of new administration. Really, the important point is that approval rates have not changed much from the before, and approval rates are still very high at 80%, 90%. So E2 visas are still being routinely approved. It's still a very popular option that we see from a lot of clients who are opening up businesses in the United States. So it still remains a viable option going forward. Okay, so now let's turn to the Q&A perhaps, and we'll address those. Okay. I want to buy a business in the same state that my brother lives. Would that hurt my case? So, questions that are specific like that, I would say reach out to us for a consultation, and we will be happy to look at the individual circumstances and advise accordingly. And I'll take the other one, and then maybe Yongki can take the remaining. Can I sell my assets in my country as a source of funds to someone who is in the USA? And if can I send the money to can the other person send the money to my US business account instead of me directly sending the money from my country because there's a limit for sending dollars in my country? I would in those types of cases, it would be important to maintain the trail of funds that were in your personal control to the business accounts. So I would actually suggest wiring the money directly from your personal account to your business's account instead of having this third-party intermediary, even if there is a limit for sending the dollars. let's say, there's a daily limit, you can maybe break out the amounts and, have multiple smaller transfers instead of having one large transfer. But definitely it is important to make sure that the trail is clear. If you're the one who's selling your assets, you want to show that the money is landing in your account, and then from your personal account, the money is being sent to the E2 business account. So having that clear trail of funds is very important.
Okay, I will answer the next one. If I retain your services for my E2 visa application, I wanted to ask about your availabilities, or will your representation remain active, including agreed fees, regardless of how long preparation? Okay, definitely you need to schedule a private consultation with us. One thing we can tell you for now is that we don't charge the like, hourly basis for the E2 visa case. So we can discuss more details about your case, but we will usually charge the fixed amount for your E2 visa case based on our analysis. So you can definitely schedule a meeting with us. Okay. Next, can you submit a second application at the consulate in the UK to get the stamp after getting the approval via change of status amending? Yes, we can definitely submit. You can even submit simultaneously two applications at the same time. You don't have to wait the USCIS approval. Uh, but yeah, answering to your question, yes. You can definitely submit your E2 visa consular processing application after USCIS approve your case. Okay, that's all. Uh, Thank you for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to visit our website and schedule a consultation with our team. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you.